Hello and welcome to E-SouthAsia Sunday Boithok, as we are calling it now, to a special conversation on climate change. Today's episode is a bit different. Different in a way that we often talk about things that's actually taking place socially, or the current affairs that's kind of like has more political edge to it. But today, the conversation is about everyone. It's about the global crisis, something that has been one of the greatest movements or one of the most impacted event in our lives of this century. It's the climate change. Obviously, the debate of climate change has been going on for a while, but since recently, it has become a movement quite across the generation. Often it's been tagged as a movement of the younger generation. So to ask a few more questions around what is climate change, what it has been, its impact, how it has been gaining momentum across the world, all these things we wanted to delve further into through E-SouthAsia. And to discuss with me, I have invited Munazza Siddiqui, who is a broadcast journalist and columnist from Pakistan. Now, I would like to give a little background about my esteemed guest today, because Ms. Siddiqui has been in the area of journalism for 26 years now. It's been a long time. And she has seen the growth of this climate change debate, discourse, whatever you call it. And she has been covering this, and she has been closely following it, how it has an impact overall. And what she has done through her work, she has been the executive producer of Geo News International. She has also been the editor of The Economist Jang Group. It's a joint annual publication, and a regular columnist for Daily English, the news. Now, with her experience and with her, expertise, I would like to discuss the climate change a bit in detail in E-SouthAsia platform. So, Munazza, if I call you Munazza throughout the show, is that all right?
Fine, that's perfect.
And welcome, a warm welcome to today's Sunday Boithok, as we are calling it. How are you?
Good, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm really honored.
Oh no, it's been our honor to have you. Like I said, the introduction, recently what we have been seeing that the climate change debate has taken actually a new form. It has become a movement. Policymakers are now paying more attention to it. We have seen loads of changes happening, especially post-COVID. There is a tendency going back to addressing this climate change and any issues related to it. But since you have seen it for a long time, you have been covering, you have been writing columns on it, what has been your understanding of the society's response to the climate change crisis? How they have been responding?
Saima, thank you for having me on today's show. We all have been a victim and an observer of this climate change. And my experience has taught me that as a society, we tend to focus more on leaving a better planet to our kids, to our children. And that's been the focus. Now, that has not worked. And we can see that it makes people overwhelmed when you say that you need to leave a better planet to our kids, because it's the whole planet. So and as an individual, people feel overwhelmed. So what I have been advocating for a while is that instead of talking so much about leaving a better planet to our kids, we need to focus on leaving better kids to the planet, because after all, the planet did come first, and we need to leave a better generation that can carry this planet forward. And so that's one thing. Now, what this basically means for an individual is that we need to stop raising brats. We need to stop raising kids who feel that they are entitled to everything around them as well as the planet. We need to tell them that they do not own this planet. They are just the keepers, which means it is their responsibility and their duty to pass on this planet to the next generation in a better, if not in exactly the same condition that they got it, if not better. And how do we do that? How do individuals and families do that? We need to focus on changing the relationship that our children have with the climate, and for starters, say, with garbage. I know it sounds kind of weird when we say it like that, but garbage is not just something dirty. It is something that is causing a lot of problems. And that is, for me, I think that is the basis of climate change, how we deal with garbage. We need to make our children responsible for the garbage that they produce. We need to give them the responsibility of taking the garbage bag out to the dump site. In South Asia, kids don't do that, especially most of the kids, they don't do that. And the parents don't expect them to do that. So they don't understand where all this is going. They don't understand the repercussion of the garbage that they're producing and the impact that is having on the climate. So we need to change that relationship. We need to make our kids more responsible and understand what that, actions have consequences, especially on such a, on a global level. Now, the reason I say is that when we say that, the focus has been that we need to leave a better planet for our kids, people get overwhelmed because to their mind, and it's a fact also that climate change and environmental studies is a very complex thing, but it's complex in a very positive manner because it's something that can be broken down into boxes and and taken one thing at a time. Like everyone can do their own bit in it. People just don't know how to go about it. So the easiest thing that they find to do is, okay, what can we do? We'll go and plant a tree. Now, don't get me wrong. Tree plantation is obviously it's a must. We need to have forest cover for the planet. But it's like every drop makes an ocean, and without the required number of drops, there won't be any ocean. Likewise, we do need trees. But that's not the only thing. Because a tree is fine, but as a society and as families, we need to go further than that. And training your kids to be environmentally responsible is not a very difficult thing. It just requires parents and families to understand that social hypocrisy in this matter especially will not work anymore. The pandemic has taught us this, and very clearly. It's like on our faces kind of thing.
It's interesting you say this because when we see in the West, like if we divide the global North and the global South in terms of attitude towards this climate change and societal approach to it, you are saying that the South Asian approach to it, the South Asian approach is like it's more they are the victim. They are actually bearing the brunt of climate change. On the other hand, the global North is all about the perpetrators. In other words, have been tagged like that because they are producing more energy and stuff like that. Now, my question is, when we are dealing with people in the region, say for example, now we are focusing on global South. How do we change that perception? What roles different mechanisms of the society play in order to change that perception that you are saying from waste management or the garbage management? What is the main challenges or barriers to it in terms of changing them?
But I believe that the first and the foremost challenge is population. When we say North versus South, one has to understand that population plays a very important part in it. When you have more people than resources, things get chaotic. And in South Asia especially, population control is something that needs to be focused upon. There is no other way out. And the planet cannot take this much burden. And South Asian countries, I have so many problems, and most of them are related to population. When there is a fight for resource, the social structure starts to break down. And while we can say that we are victims of the pollution and the carbon produced by the Western and developed countries, we can't just leave it there. We can't keep on playing the victim card. We have to play our part. And I believe that population control is the first and foremost thing that developing countries have to focus on. You can't have more population than your resources. For me, it's that simple.
What about the attitude? Because it's also a cultural change as well, isn't it? That how you change the cultural approach to, okay, I am eating something, I need to put it in the right place, or I have to, there's a recycling area. The word recycling is very, very vague in South Asian communities. For example, I can say for Bangladesh, what we have seen is there was very less use of plastic, because there is not much packaging going on, what we have in the Western countries. But nevertheless, the amount of waste that's produced is not being decomposed, or say, for example, not being used in a very eco-friendly way. Do you think these are the concepts of the West, or this is something that can be replicated and used as a cultural change in terms of attitude?
Saima, I believe that if people refuse to change for the better, nature has a way of forcing its hand. Recently, during last summer, the kind of rains we had in Karachi, especially, we had all over the country, but Karachi proved to be extremely ill-equipped to deal with them. And one of the reasons was, besides bad construction and encroachment and all that, was plastic, because it had clogged all the drains and all the nalas and all those. So that created the backflow and an entire mess in the city. So nature kind of is forcing its hand. And that's when this whole campaign about reducing plastic kind of took off, and people started taking it more seriously. It was also a time of the pandemic, and we saw that because people were stuck at home, so use of plastic had gone down. But this I believe, and it's again picking up. People have forgotten that lesson. They're again in that cycle. But like I said, nature has a way of forcing its hand, and it will. So, and one thing I would like to mention, the younger generation, the kids that were born in this century, I really admire them, because the way they look at things is completely different from how we did. And they are really very, very active about preserving the planet and about combating climate change. And world over, we've seen these young kids out in a rally and demonstrations to save the planet. So I'm really hopeful about that. But you see, kids are not the only people populating the planet, and so it's something that as society, as individuals, we have to do.
True. The other thing that we are talking about, you were talking about in Pakistan, that one of the causes that you have seen was the use of plastic, or the lack of proper infrastructure to tackle the plastic waste. What has been the other reasons, or one of the main reasons for the impact of climate change in Pakistan? In what ways or forms you are observing it?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last.
The impact of climate change, how it has been showing up. For example, you talked about having a flood and the lack of proper infrastructure, using the plastic as how you are going to contain it or use it. Has there been other issues or the reasons which is having an impact on the overall environment, and which is actually feeding to the climate change crisis?
Deforestation. I think after plastic, after the excessive use of plastic is deforestation, and it's not something it's not an easy thing to combat, because the reality is that you have vested interests, you have industries that are dependent on wood, and you have, as a result, you have mafias that will go for deforestation. And the government is trying to plant trees. This government especially has taken it as an initiative to plant trees, but it's not working. The speed doesn't match, because you see, you can cut a tree in a second, and even if you plant another one, it takes years to grow.
Yeah.
So the rate absolutely cannot manage. It requires policy that discourages and penalizes deforestation. So that's another huge thing. And like I said, it not only boils down to individual consumption, it also, as a society, we need to understand what we are getting into. What will happen in a few decades when there are no trees? We saw that. We saw the impact of climate change. At least Pakistan saw it this last summer. And we need to take lessons from whoever is doing the best job. There's no doubt about that.
Also, a lot have been said that the climate change issues or the impacts are mostly seen. It's an urban crisis. It's not a crisis that has hit all the villages or the rural areas, apart from the coastal belts and people who are living in the coastal region. What is your take on this? What do you see? Is this a true, claim, or you think it's different?
The reason people say that is because they see the immediate impact on urban areas and on coastal communities. But that does not mean that the rural communities are not being impacted. It is just that because the way population is divided, and a lot of the affluent communities live along usually the coastal belts and big cities, they are highlighted. But for example, agriculture is being impacted. We had a severe locust problem last summer. That's just one example of how we lost acres and acres of agriculture produce. So it's not to say that they're not impacted. And as a result, people from rural areas tend to migrate towards cities, big cities, which again causes a lot of pressure on the cities. And again, it's a whole vicious cycle. So I don't agree. Rural communities are equally impacted. They get more rain. The downflow of rivers from mountains are impacted. Deforestation goes on over there, and people have to move out. So yes, if this continues, we'll end up with just people living in clusters in urban centers. And what about our food? What about agriculture? What about food security, for that matter? Food security comes from these agricultural areas, which are kind of termed as rural areas. They are the agricultural hub of every country.
So in terms of looking at it, what we're trying to do is we're now trying to get a picture of what is happening in Pakistan in terms of the climate change crisis, and whether it's linked to the global response or whether it's not. It is still quite disjointed in a way that people are not aware enough, which we got from you in our first half of the conversation, that it's actually something, it's not widely taken as a priority within the society, if I am not wrong. So why is the case? Do you think it is because the policymakers or the media has not picked it up as a priority, or people are not educated enough on this issue? What do you think?
Well, let me talk about the media first. Big part of it, I think media has done quite a lot. We have been highlighting this issue for years now, and we have been at the forefront of highlighting it, and the media has done it. But of course, more can be done about it. And but I need to talk about here is the disconnect and the conflict of interest between the policymakers and the people and at the grassroots level. We see both these trends. Not only is there a conflict of interest, there is also a disconnect. Now, conflict of interest is governments do not like to bring about policies which would inconvenience their voters. And let's face it, policies for the betterment of the environment need people to change their habits and their attitudes, which does inconvenience a lot of people, and they don't want it. So the governments are hesitant to do anything drastic, but we have reached a point where something needs to be done, and quite aggressively, to save the planet. The other thing is the disconnect. Now, the disconnect is there because what governments in developing countries do is that they make a Ministry of Environment, and they think they've done their job. They're good, and but that is in isolation. What needs to be done is that ministry should have a role in every other ministry. For example, the Environment Ministry needs to have a say in what goes on in our schools, in the education sector. Why like that ministry needs to ensure that there is a subject, or at least some sort of teaching about the environment at school level. Either it's in the curriculum or practically, they need to do that. Then comes the health. The Environment Ministry needs to be part of, or needs to be connected to all these sectors: health sector for medical waste management, to the industries for the industrial waste, to the construction sector, to make sure that things are done in compliance with the environmental priorities. And while when you talk to government officials, they usually say, oh yes, that is all there, but it's not, because we don't see that on the ground. So there is some sort of a disconnect, and the policymakers need to figure out where and why that disconnect is there. So, like I said, this is also the governments are hesitant to take any drastic action which would impact their vote bank. In this regard, there's one thing I would like to mention. During this pandemic, the banking sector, they realized that if people stayed home and they did go out and there was no economic activity, banks would not make profit. So some of them, the forward-looking ones, they came up with this initiative. It's probably called the Environment Society Governance or something like that, which basically meant that they refused, or they're still doing that, they refused to give loans to entities which are not environment friendly. For example, if a coal power plant approaches them for a loan, they will not give them loan, because they know that in the long term, this is going to impact the environment, and hence this is going to impact their balance sheet and their profits. So they wouldn't do it. They don't do it. Now, this is something that the government can do in all developing countries and South Asia, obviously. They need to take a lesson from that and implement these kind of policy across the various sectors of society, whether it's in various industries. And so this is one thing which I feel that the government can do for starters, because right now, when you look at the government's environmental plan, it's like a chart with an X and a Y. So they've got the X, they've got the Y, they've got the nice curves and looking all good, but it's a two-dimensional thing. It's kind of dead. To bring that policy alive, they need to add the Z factor and make it 3D, make it alive, so that it works and people relate to it.
Some of our audience have been commenting. So one of the comments being that we need to ban plastic through and through. It should be stopped no matter what. The other questions or observation that we had was like, the government could do enough policies, but if people are not ready to accept those behavior change, or they are not educated enough to accept that has an impact in their lives. In other words, what we have been talking about, prioritizing it, making it an absolute necessity of life, a part of life. what can the government do?
Like I said, for starters, the government needs to seriously bring about a population control policy. And we can no longer afford to have an unchecked population growth. And once that is done, only then even families will be in a better position to prioritize, positive behavior towards our environment. If you have a family of 10, their primary focus is food. And they will not be bothered about, how to use plastic or how to dispose of waste. That is never their priority. And population is a huge problem. We need to accept that. But I must admire, Bangladesh did a very good job in population control. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that. And that is one thing there are a lot of people who believe that we need population because it adds to our strength. But how does a weak population, add to any country's strength? It doesn't. It in fact convolutes our social attitudes towards better behavior. People are forced to compromise, and when you have a huge population, you have poverty, and when there's poverty, there's hunger. So there is a mismanagement at every level. You can't control it without controlling population.
I think it's really interesting the way you term it, because you are actually breaking it down at different levels, trying to show that where it does hit and what has been contributing to this issue. One of the things that I would say that climate change has not been on the top of the priority list until recently, when the world is seriously hit by it, when the world is seriously impacted by it. We have started to see the direct results of what has been going on since industrial revolution, when coal has been one of the prior things that we have been warming it up. We have been sitting in an oven for the last two centuries, which is actually contributing now. So I guess I also think that I agree with you in a way that we need to change the discourse in a way how we present it. The narrative should be that yes, it has not been the priority, or it hasn't shown any direct impact, but now it is. It has becoming a safeguarding concern to many population, and hence it has become a movement. Now, if we come to the movement side of it, we have seen across the world people who are actually protesting for climate change, the brigades and the people who have been coming up with innovative ideas and making it an issue of the picket lines, right? So we have seen direct it clashes with the government. The government has been very usually using brute force to contain the movement in many ways. How is this movement same as any other movement in your eyes, or is this movement have been a political pawn, or is this movement a true movement that can bring about change? What is your perception of this?
My understanding is that if any movement that takes off because there's a need for that movement. Mm-hmm. Environmental movement across the world took off because there was an urgent, there was a realization that something needs to be done urgently. Now, the reason some of these environment movements are getting aggressive, it shows the desperation of people who understand the issue and who understand that the planet doesn't have a lot of time. Global warming is a reality. It's having an impact, and that needs to be combated. And it's not something that can be done, say, in the next, the world doesn't have the luxury of, say, the next 1 century. Things need to be done right now. And that is the desperation we see in the aggressive postures of these eco-warriors, I would call them. and these are mostly young people, and they do, it's their future also, that they're going to live there. And so I see it as that. I see it as a movement that is filling a gap, a need, and it's going to be there. It's going to stay. How governments deal with these movements is obviously it will determine what course of action they take further down the line. But it's a natural thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, do you see this movement, which has still been a movement of the elite urban educated class, reach the subaltern, the peripheral, or the niche of the population? Do you see something happening like that?
You see, being part of any movement is, at the end of the day, I would put it in quotes, a luxury that a poor person cannot afford. Being part of a movement requires a full belly, right? So for a movement, it's not a revolution, it's a movement. So it is being led by people who are from the urban centers and who are educated. And let's face it, it is also their responsibility. They were given the opportunity, and they had the privilege of being educated. So it falls upon them to lead and be part of that movement. We can't expect it from an uneducated rural person. That person is actually a victim. And so I fully support the global movement for the preservation of the environment. And what these kids are doing is really amazing.
Thank you. We have spoken a lot, quite detailed about movements, but I also know that you are really, really passionate about the food waste management and the waste management. You have spoken about it a bit earlier of the program. Now, if we look at Pakistan and how Pakistan's food policy has been, or the waste management policies have been, what is your understanding? Is it enough? Is it up to date, or it's quite backdated, or there is none?
Like most developing countries, Pakistan's waste management policy is not up to mark at all. It's a very weak policy. It's there, and they have the procedures are in place, but the implementation lacks, I think, the will of the government. Again, like I said, they don't want to annoy their voters, and their voters are people who for them their bread and butter comes first. I'll give you an example. During this last monsoon flood in Karachi, people realized that plastic was a huge issue. But what to do about it? Because when they shut down these informal plastic cottage industries, people went out of job. And they became unemployed, and which led to protests and sort of people, and then there was this pressure on the government to do something about it. You see, without providing for an alternative means of income, shutting down such informal plastic manufacturing industries backfired. So, like I said, so that is about the waste management. But there's one thing that countries like Pakistan can do. And like I said, I believe in giving people an easy way out, an easy thing to do. And that one thing is food wastage. Individuals can do a lot about food wastage. You know, I was reading this United Nations report, and it said that if food wastage were a country, it would be the third largest country in the world after United States and China. 1/3 of the food this world produces is wasted. Yes. And one would ask, you know, I have spoken to a lot of people, and some of them, you know, turned around and said, oh, but, you know, the food that is wasted goes back to the environment. So this is the level of understanding. And when you tell them that the food that goes to a pit versus the food that decays on its own naturally, there's a difference between methane and carbon dioxide, and it's a whole science. So food wastage needs to be controlled, and that is something individuals can do. In urban cities, the United States is notorious for food wastage. But even countries like Pakistan, a lot of food is wasted. And that needs to be, yes, there are a lot of these NGOs that work towards, collecting food from restaurants and distributing them to the low-income communities, all well and good. But despite that, our attitude towards food wastage is very lax. And we need to fix that. We need to buy what we can consume. Again, that is also a psyche. This is also consumerism, which needs to be controlled. And like I said, it's a whole cycle thing. So, but these are things one can start at home. Like one can, change their relationship with garbage, with food wastage. This is something that I feel people should be taught, and there should be a national effort via media to educate people in this regard.
One of the things that we usually see when a policy is made or an issue is surfacing is the lack of information. Now, like you said, that a lot of the people have absolutely no idea about what happens to their food. The journey of a food from being produced to being ending up on somebody's plate, and once it's been consumed, where it ends. So the life cycle of a food is not often quite understood. Now, in that way, where does Pakistan stand in terms of the research and data collection and building that data, breaking it down to an understanding level where people can easily access that and use it for their own benefit? What is happening locally?
Locally, there are a lot of groups and a lot of that are working in this area. A lot of good work is being done, I must say. But the data is there. But understanding that data and translating it into policy is something that is not actively pursued. Or maybe there are, the governments are under pressure from so many sides, like from external, internal, that for them, dedicating resources to the understanding of this data and understanding the severity of the issue and fixing it is not a priority. Whereas that is what the priority should be. No matter how many buildings you put up, no matter how many roads you construct, at the end of the day, if you don't have air to breathe, what's the point of all that? So, yes.
Yeah, go on. Sorry, finish it.
No, I'm just saying that, there are laws, like there have been studies which have suggested that the policy should be made tailored to the psyche of people. This is a universal psyche. If you pay someone for something, they will do it. So if you tax people on the garbage that they produce or incentivize them on the garbage that they produce, it will have results. That is something that is not being done here. In fact, it's hardly done anywhere in the world except a couple of places. But it has shown positive results, and that should be replicated. Incentivizing behavior that should be worked on.
It's really interesting because from your point of view, what we have heard till now, that the approach in Pakistan has not been similar or for that matter, not only Pakistan, but the developing countries as a whole, has not been similar. There hasn't been a coherent or central approach to this crisis, whereas this crisis is a central crisis. It's a global crisis which is impacting, yes, at different levels, at different places, but it is something like the corona itself, isn't it? The virus has hit everyone. So in that way, when a crisis like that is global, A, B, a crisis that is something is hitting countries who are developed and developing, how do we keep up with the policies to come to a level where everyone's equal? Because there is still a wider gap, isn't it, in terms of delivering it, planning it, and then making it something that will have an impact to everyone, not only one country, because it's impacting other countries as well. So how do we, in your eyes, how do we really address it in a holistic way?
In my opinion, you see, efforts at the macro level, globally, at the macro level, to come up with some sort of cohesive strategy to combat climate change is not working. They're trying, yes, and there have been small successes here and there, but given the urgency of the issue, we're not seeing a relative success in that manner. And that is why I have come to the understanding that we need to focus more on micro policies, micro steps that, individuals will have to play a part. Governments alone cannot do, no matter how interconnected or cohesive their policies are, they will not work if people cannot connect to them, if people cannot relate to them, and if those policies do not offer something to people. They are not going to work. And that is why I focus more on what individuals can do, what families can do. And that's what, the governments, for example, like I said, the curriculum. The governments need to make sure that, I'm sure in the West they have done, but say in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and India and South Asia, governments need to make environment a part of the curriculum, like math, science, and other subjects. They need to make it, and they need to teach children from class 1 what the issue is and how to deal with it. And you'll be surprised, what children learn in schools has an impact on how eventually their parents, on the change in attitude of their parents, because children can be a change maker at home. So this should be done in schools, in madrasas, wherever, however. So, these are the kind of things. Engaging the individual will make a difference. Having, UN goals is all very good, because that engages all countries, and that kickstarts a conversation on environment. It's all very good, but you can't leave the individual out of it.
It's very interesting how you say that you actually have a bottom-up approach to it as well as top-down. That is actually the primary goal of all policies, that you have to ensure it has been delivered at all levels. Now, we are coming almost at the last segment of our talking points today. So in this part, I would really like to look at the solutions. So one of the solutions that you've already mentioned in terms of education. Now, what are other things, if we start from the micro level, say, for example, that we go bottom up, what are other things that really can be done in order to address the crisis?
You see, whatever difference or positive difference in terms of use of plastics has been made, it has been made through individual efforts or from efforts at the very local level. Yes. People themselves have started realizing that plastic is bad. It eventually leads to a lot of problems and so on. So whatever reduction in the use of plastics, for example, we've seen is because these individuals were themselves inspired to do that. And so, like I said, modifying behavior at the family level is very important. Another example I'll give you, consumerism. We go for wood furniture. Why? Why, this is again an attitude. I'm not saying you should, one would ask, if not wood, then what else? But then you need to also think about what kind of wood, and the kind of wood that, trees that grow quickly. Maybe that's the wood that we need to use. We need to modify our behavior, how we buy things, the nature of things that we buy, and the food that we consume, how much meat we consume. Because consuming meat means you need more cattle, and you need more cattle, and then you need more grazing ground for them, and that means cutting down more trees. So these are the few things that people can do on their own. They can do, of course, planting a tree would be great anytime. That's something people should ordinarily do. And increasing the forest cover in cities, in urban areas must be a priority. And in fact, replenishing our forest area should be a priority. And people can do that. It's not very difficult. And I don't think that the government would really need to jump through hoops to get it done. These are simple things. So when, okay, policy is all right, but these things need to be taken up simultaneously.
The other things that we also see is there are two ends to the crisis. One is the emission side of it, like how much you are producing the greenhouse gases and how much emissions been going on, the carbon footprint and whatnot. And the other part is that how you are containing that emission, how you are actually. So it's both reactive and preventative measures that we need. Now, in the West, especially I can say here, what we have done locally, we have declared climate emergency from local government level to the central level. We are coming up with policies that address our change of behavior. We are controlling emission. At the same time, we are also trying to be proactive in terms of changing behavior. Is this something you think the local governments or because we have talked a great deal about central government, the policymakers, the global politics, but what about the local government? What do you think they can do to address this, say, in Pakistan?
Well, in Pakistan, unfortunately, for this to happen, we would need to have local governments which are fully empowered. And unfortunately, we don't have local governments, because unless we have fully empowered local governments, such initiatives, there would be no one to take it. No one would be interested. People who own an area, who own a locality, would want to do something about it. And that's one of the reasons. The reason I did not bring this up, because that the conversation would head towards politics. But now that you mention, we need to have fully empowered local governments, because only through them we can come up with these policies which engage communities. Because it's just not possible for the federal government or the provincial government to engage entire communities. That is done at a very grassroots level. So that is another thing that needs to be urgently done, and it's not being done.
It is easy, isn't it? If we have that dialogue, because issues like environment, issues like these, which impacts communities, which impacts the local livelihood, it doesn't have a political edge to it. So that could easily be looked at more empowerment, or I would say devolution of power at the local level. They don't have to maintain the budget or everything, but they can actually work as the delivery end of it. Why is that not happening, you think? Issues like which doesn't have so much political power grab or anything at the local level. So
because I think people in Pakistan, they don't really care about things that they cannot touch, or things that don't hurt them physically. Something that they can't see, they're not really bothered about that. And that's one of the reasons political parties in Pakistan don't have environment in their manifesto. Even if there is, it's just very superficial. But I've yet to come across any, substantial, mention of it in any manifesto. This present government had this initiative of tsunami tree and, you know, planting so many trees and everything. But like I said, politics also has not been very kind to the environment in Pakistan, or the fight for environment, because it's not a priority for them. It's not a priority for an average voter. So they really don't care. And in fact, I'll tell you one thing which is very sad. What happened was, it happened in one of the northern areas, that the local administration, they planted trees, and these saplings which were about 2 to 3 feet tall. And the opponent, the opposing political party, what they did was, they actually came with a mob and destroyed all those plants. It was their, yes, political reaction to this. So when you have this kind of, you know, shallow politics, it's very difficult to, you know, do something positive or do something long term. And these were 2 to 3 feet tall plants which were planted across acres, and they were all destroyed. And so the reason I'm telling you is that it'll show you the psyche of our political parties, how seriously they take the issue or non-seriously they take the issue.
It's really interesting, the behavior of like vandalism. The political vandalism is quite a statement, isn't it, across South Asia, or we have seen it in other parts, but because we have been you know, born and brought up in that society, we are quite familiar with that kind of like vandalism on trees. We have seen trees being cut to block roads, to cut off access and things like that. That is something really is an issue of concern. Wrapping up, I really want to end with something that is viable, that is something solution-based, and something our viewers can take on from our show. So if we look at the solutions, that immediate solutions that we can think of and we can actually propose through you, what would they be? You have mentioned quite a lot, but if we can summarize and then give kind of like direction, that this is something that everyone can look at.
Okay. On the individual level?
Any
yeah. On the individual level, yeah. Parents need to teach their children, or rather, parents need to redefine the relationship with garbage. They need to, and that's what they need to teach their kids. One, food wastage. That's something that families can do collectively, and it doesn't require, it requires no investment at all. It requires no effort. It just requires a little understanding. That's something they can do. Of course, people have been, you know, people who are conscious are planting trees, and that's all very good. This is on the individual level. On the government level, like I said, population control and similar measures, for which I think, for starters, the government needs to take on board groups and groups that carry influence in society. For example, the religious parties, the clerics, who hold quite a lot of sway in rural communities or uneducated communities. They need to be taken on board for these kind of things, and through them, I think that's one thing that the government can easily do. It's not very, doesn't require resources. It doesn't require much. And like I said, the government needs to come up with a multifaceted, horizontal plus vertical kind of an environment policy that touches all the sectors of governance. So that's my take.
That's quite. I think you have covered it all. The overarching things that needs to be done, and obviously, in today's program, we have tried to look at what has been causing or contributing to the climate change crisis. And the focus had been mostly Pakistan, but we have also covered like what is happening with South Asia as well, and also tried to link it with the global movement, like what is happening and how we have been responding as a whole. Obviously, you may find that we have talked a great length on policy, the policy changes, and how it can have impacts. But it has to start both ends from, like Munazza Siddiqui has said, that it should be bottom up and top down, which means that at individual levels, there needs to be genuine passion for change. People need to understand that there is a whole economics related to food waste and waste management, and which has a deep-rooted impact. Just to put it simply, that if we could have stopped food wastage, there would have been no hunger in the world. If we can put it that simply, that we look at people and we often feel sympathy or empathy towards people who have not had food. But if we have stopped food waste, this would not have happened anyway. It would have stopped ages ago. So that is a simple clue that what we can do, that is within our power, every individual one of us. And the second thing I think is very, very important, to not to look at it or, brush it under the carpet saying it's not my problem. Climate change is such a thing that is impacting every single one of us. If not us, we can push it aside, but our children or our grandchildren will bear the brunt if we don't start doing something now. So I would like to thank my honorable guest, Munazza Siddiqui. It was a wonderful an hour spent with you talking about environment and climate change. I hope that our viewers will be benefiting from some of it. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Saima. Thank you for making me comfortable. I really enjoyed having this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And till next week, goodbye from me.